Hello and welcome back to my channel, To The Witchy Reader. I am here with my mom again for part 2 of our book club. As we mentioned in part 1, we decided to read Queen Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots, The Controversial History of Cousins Turned Rivals. Very long title.
Yeah, it is very long.
But we finished it, and so we are here to discuss it. You want to start? Do you have anything to say?
The first thing I want to say is I was a little bit disappointed because I was expecting the entire book to be about the rival. And I know I was already halfway in before they even got to Mary Queen of Scots because they talked mainly about Henry and how, which I kind of get how they wanted to show how Elizabeth got to power. Then later on wanted to show how Mary got to power, which they kind of glossed over her real quickly, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I know the beginning. It took me a minute to get into the book because I was like, the beginning ended up being about King Henry more and his early years with his earlier wives. It didn't show like the wives after. I did mention Jane Seymour a couple times, but it was mostly about Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. And we had gotten really into King Henry and his wives, so we know a lot about there. There was a couple things I think I didn't know, but for the most part, a lot of this I did know because I got really into it. And honestly, a lot of the reason why I wanted to read this book was because of Mary Queen of Scots. Yeah. For those of you that do not know, I absolutely love the TV show Reign. That has to do with Mary. And
good show. If you haven't watched it, please do.
Yes, it's a very good show. And I was very interested in learning more about Mary as a person in history because obviously there were some things they kept true to history, but there were some things they changed as well. And there were some things I knew that were different than history, but there were some things I was wondering if it actually happened and if it happened the way it happened on the show. So I was really curious and to find...
It's interesting to find out the difference between the show, and it's no different than if you're reading a book and you want to see the differences between the book and the show. It's the same with true history stuff. You want to see what in the show is real and what is not.
Yeah.
And that's interesting.
And so I got a little, I wouldn't say bored because I am interested in King Henry and his wives, but I already knew a lot of what they were talking about. So it's like, I think I wouldn't have minded if it was about the Tudors. It was supposed to be about the Tudors, you know? But since it was supposed to be about Elizabeth and Mary, I was a little bored because like that's not the story I signed up for.
I was hoping that it was more about, I was hoping the entire book was about their issue.
Yeah.
But I was intrigued about a few things.
But I think I wouldn't have minded so much because I like the idea of it showing how they both rose to power. But I guess I understand why they wanted to show how Elizabeth came to be in the first place, considering everything that happened with his first two wives that got to Elizabeth.
Yeah.
But I still think it should have at least started with Elizabeth's birth and then showed her rise to power and then Mary's rise to power and then their history. I think that would have made the beginning less annoying, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was, the book is only, well, I listened to the audiobook, but it was 4 hours long, and I know I was at 2.5 hours before they even got to Mary.
Yeah.
And that was kind of disturbing because I literally wanted the whole thing to be about the two of them together fighting for the power. But there is a few things that interest me, though.
Yeah. My favorite part was the Mary part, because like I said, that's honestly, I wanted to know more about their history as rivals, but I'm not gonna lie, a lot of me just wanted to read about Mary, Queen of Scots, I did, but it was so interesting because, like I said, I love the TV show Reign, so when I was reading her chapter, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so true to what happened in the show, and there were some things that were different, but it seems like after Frances died in the show, it seems like they kept a lot truer to the history than the first couple of seasons did. And it was really interesting to see, hey, this happened in the show too. So the show was kind of accurate in some ways. And I absolutely loved it. I kept reverting back to the show, I swear.
I swear there's a few things that irritated the crap out of me because the entire fight about people trying to take over the Scottish crown, as well as trying to take over the English crown, had everything to do with religion. And that was what's irritating me. The Catholics didn't like having a Protestant queen, and then the Protestants in Scotland didn't like having a Catholic queen. And Elizabeth was afraid that Mary was going to take over her crown and bring it back to Catholicism. And I'm like, but I did like the fact that Mary didn't care. She was a Catholic queen, but she was giving respect to both Catholic
Mm-hmm.
and Protestant, which I like because I think every ruler should do that, give you the option. But in England, it was a big fight about, they were afraid that Mary was going to take over the English crown and bring it back to Catholicism. That's ridiculous.
I think a lot of Elizabeth's issue had more to do with the fact that people didn't like her in the first place because they didn't like her mother. And because she was a Protestant ruling Catholic, it's like that was just another reason why they didn't want her. And she was terrified of being overthrown.
But I think they also thought that she was going to do what her older sister did and start killing Catholics. Because I think that's something I did not know, which Mary, which was Catherine Aragon's daughter, she when she became queen, even though it was for a short time, she started killing Protestants because she didn't want anyone to bring it back to Protestantism or whatever. And I don't know if that's a word, but anyway, so she started killing Protestants. And one thing it said in the book was that it was that a lot of people, a lot of Catholics were afraid that when Elizabeth got in there, that she was going to start killing Catholics the way her sister killed Protestants. And so I think you're right. Elizabeth was not only afraid of being taken over, I think she's afraid of being assassinated.
Yeah.
Because the Catholics were being ruthless they were being more ruthless than the Protestants were at trying to get rid of her.
Because the thing is, Mary did not care about the English throne. Okay, it was everyone around her. Which happened in the show as well, because she wanted to rule Scotland. That was her main thing. But also because of her alliance with France, she was ruling France as well. Of course, Francis ended up dying pretty young from an infection. But so she goes back to Scotland. But before Francis died, his father was trying to use her to. So if she didn't get France an heir with Francis, then they would get not only Scotland and France, but also England because of her claim. And I think
it's all about power.
Pretty much. And I feel so bad for Mary in so many ways because she didn't care about the English throne. Okay, no. She didn't even really care about the French throne. She cared about the Scotland throne. That was her kingdom.
That's why after Francis died and she moved back to Scotland, she married somebody who was Scottish for the sole purpose of maintaining the Scottish throne. That's literally all she cared about. Was the Scottish throne. She didn't care about the French throne. She didn't care about the English throne. She just wanted Scotland.
I started out reading this book on KU, but I ended up starting listening to the audiobook instead. And I remember when I first heard John Knox's name, I got so mad because I was like, this dude is real? He was on the show and I hated him. And I was like, he actually... like I said, I was surprised how accurate they actually got in some of Reign, and to find out that John Knox was real. He did everything that the show did. He was trying to overthrow Mary and this and that. I'm like, oh my gosh.
But at the very end of the book, it makes a comment about to this day, as historians don't know if Mary's downfall was because of the fact that she was inexperienced at being a queen, or the fact that she had a bunch of people trying to destroy her. And the fact of the matter is, I think it's both. I really do. Because she was never given the chance. People were trying to destroy her from infancy.
Pretty much.
Because they did not, first of all, they did not want a woman to be ruler. Mm-hmm. And second of all, they just wanted to, guys want power. And that's what it is.
Yeah.
But I think her inexperience and after a while, I think she just got tired. I think she got tired of everybody, even the men that she married were plotting against her simply because they didn't like that she had more power than them. And it's ridiculous to think that she went through all of this hell. But mad respect for Elizabeth for disliking the crap that her father did, that she refused to get married and refused to have any children because she didn't want her father's legacy to continue, which I think is funny because if you know anything about King Henry, that's what it was all about.
Yeah.
He wanted the Tudor dynasty to reign supreme forever. But what I think is the most funny about all of this is the fact that the people of England fought so hard and so violently to destroy both Mary and Elizabeth because they did not want Mary to rule England. And in the end, Mary's son took over and ran everything. He ran, then the Scottish people and the English people, especially the English people, fought so hard to keep Mary and her family out of it that in the end, it was actually Mary's son that took over all of it.
And every English monarchy from to this day is a descendant of Mary, Queen of Scots, now the Tudors.
Mm-hmm.
And it is kind of ironic because everything King Henry did was so that his legacy would last forever, and it didn't. It lasted to his children, and that was it.
But he didn't figure that because of the way he treated his wives, that the daughters of his wives
or his daughters, for that matter.
Yeah, true. They might be, because that's another reason why nobody liked Elizabeth was because of the fact that she was illegitimate, according to them, because they had the marriage of Anne Boleyn annulled, and which I think is ridiculous. If you marry someone, especially if you have children, I don't think that you should ever be able to annul it. But okay. But I was interested in something. At the very beginning of the book, it mentioned that William Shakespeare was a fan of the Tudor dynasty, which he wrote a book. Apparently, he wrote poems or whatever the heck you call it, what he did, about War of the Roses, which was interesting because the white roses represented one side, which was the English, and the red roses represented the. And because I've seen a movie called War of the Roses, with Danny DeVito and them, and it was really, really good, actually. And I think they made a remake recently. But I didn't know that William Shakespeare had made a play about it, and it had to do with the war between these two dynasties. But he favored the Tudor dynasty and wanted them to reign supreme. And that was interesting to find that out.
I like I said, I felt so bad for Mary because she was crowned after only being a week of being born because her father died. Obviously, other people were ruling until she was old enough, but people were after her entire life. And then her husband dies, the only guy she actually loved, even if she wasn't passionately in love with him like the show showed. They were good friends, and there was a mutual respect, and they did love each other at the end of the day. So losing him was heartbreaking for her. And so she goes back to Scotland, which she hasn't actually been to since she was a child. A very, very small child at that. Like a baby, basically, I think.
I think they said she was around 5 when she went to
toddler.
France.
Which she's never actually been to. She had all these forces against her, okay? She ended up having...
For no reason.
She ended up having to marry someone who she did love, but that love turned sour because he wanted power. Mm-hmm. And then Bothwell, a trusted person in her regime, ended up capturing her, raping her, and forcing her to marry him so that he can get the kingdom. And a lot of that ended up being her downfall too.
It was because a lot of the people in Scotland could not understand or was angry at the fact that she married him, which technically back in those days, you married your rapist mainly because women were considered to be impure if you were raped, like it was your fault, like it always is. And
so at that point, I don't know if it would still reign true after, because it's with the whole King Henry stuff, he was upset finding out Catherine Howard wasn't a virgin when they married, because she was 15 and she was never married. Catherine Parr, he didn't care because she was married 2 times before, so obviously she's had sex. And then there's, and the same thing would be with Mary. She already has a son with another husband. Yeah, so would she have to marry her rapist? Because it's not like she wouldn't have been virgin.
It doesn't matter back in those days. Even nowadays. Now, nowadays it's okay for a man and a woman to have sex if they're not married. But back in those days, it wasn't okay. Even though men were the ones that were doing it.
Yeah.
They were the ones that were pressuring young women, let me put it that way. And yet, so it says in the book that if a woman could not mention being raped, because if she did, everybody would look down on her instead of him. And so I think that she felt that she had no choice, because if she didn't marry him, I'm sure he would have went around sullying her name.
Yeah.
And now you and I had discussed something which I thought was interesting. is because in the book they do bring up his other wives after Anne Boleyn, because the majority of the book was about how Elizabeth got born and her becoming queen, but it did, before Henry died, it did mention his other wives, even though it was briefly. They did mention that. And you and I had discussed Catherine Howard's life and how bad it was and all of that. And we thought from watching the sixth play that that she was probably forced into sex with Thomas, which is why, and then later on King Henry. And so we thought that maybe, King Henry found out and just assumed that she slept around, but she wasn't the only one that got killed for that. So did Thomas.
Yeah, that
So
much I didn't know.
yeah, I didn't know that either. So he also paid because he slept with the king's wife.
True,
So of
that would
course,
have been
treason.
Yeah.
Everything's treason, apparently. And apparently, a lot of the trumped up charges on like Anne Boleyn, well, I believe everything that they said about Anne Boleyn is a freaking lie. But the point of the matter is, if Henry didn't like you, it was treason, no matter what. And then,
Yeah.
like Trump. Just saying.
But because I wrote a few things down in my notes, and Mary wanted to try to fix her relationship with Elizabeth because she didn't want the crown. But Elizabeth, because of her own life, and she was just so afraid of being assassinated, of people trying to take her throne.
Which is why she did not trust anyone in her command. She trusted no one.
Yeah.
Because she knew that they were all plotting against her.
And I do think it's really interesting how Elizabeth was a Protestant queen running, and most of the King England was Catholic, and then Mary was a Catholic queen, and most of Scotland was Protestant. I thought that was a really, I thought that was really interesting, and yeah. Yeah, she was also because there was also like so-called letters and stuff that helped bring down Mary after Elizabeth captured her, and as they said, it's speculation whether or not those were real. And this is just like my personal opinion, but I think they were forgery. One, a lot of the men in Scotland wanted to bring her down, anyways. Two, she has some of these said that this was going on when she was married to Francis, and one, I think she truly loved him and respected him too much to be cheating on him during that time.
Oh God, yeah.
And also because she hasn't been to Scotland since she was 5 years old, so most of the allies she ended up making in Scotland wasn't until after Francis died and she returned to Scotland. So some of these people like Rizzio and Bothwell, because it said that she so-called had affairs with them when she was married to Francis, she wouldn't have even known them, honestly. I don't think it's possible for her to have done that for a few different reasons.
That's something I thought was interesting because I knew that Elizabeth had imprisoned Mary. And I knew that it was, like 18 years, something like that she was imprisoned before she killed her. But there's two things that I thought was interesting. One is when I think of somebody in prison, especially back in those days, I think like on the movie Three Musketeers, when it's this horrible dark prison or whatever. But technically she was just on house arrest. She was in a nice house. She still had like 6 or 7 servants. And now the more Elizabeth got afraid that Mary was going to take over, she started to limit that and confined her a little bit more, but she was still living in nice homes and stuff like that. So that's not how I vision imprisonment.
I think because one is kind of taboo to like imprison a monarch at all.
That's true.
And also I think Elizabeth, even though she was fearful of Mary taking her crown and all that stuff, I think she still respected Mary as a fellow ruler who was doing what especially as a fellow woman ruler, doing what she had to do to save her kingdom and herself. I think Elizabeth respected her. But that's another thing
that interests me was the fact that Elizabeth, even though she ordered Mary's execution, was still on the fence. And the guys around her was afraid that Elizabeth was going to rescind and change her mind on killing her. So they went ahead and did it. And Elizabeth didn't find out until like a day or two later that they went ahead and did it. without her knowledge. And they did that because they really were afraid that she would change her mind. Because I think she was kind of pressured into um, agreeing to do that anyway. And then when they thought that she was might change her mind because she kept her in prison for 18 years because she didn't want to.
Yeah.
She did not want to kill her.
For a couple reasons, I think. One, because obviously her mom was executed, and I think that was
That played a big
trauma.
part.
Also, because she is a fellow ruler, a fellow woman ruler who, at the end of the day, I think they had a mutual respect for each
Yes.
other. Even though men were putting them against each other, that's what it came down to at the end of the day. And so I don't think that she really wanted to do that to another person. I mean, she didn't want to be like her father, who would behead anybody that he simply didn't like.
Exactly.
And yeah, but yeah, but I agree. I love that Elizabeth chose not to have kids.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great power move to kind of upset her dead father.
Yeah. It was her way of taking back the power that
Yeah.
he took away from her mother and crap like that. And it's really sad that it comes down to, you know, having to choose not to have an heir because you don't think your father's legacy is worth carrying on.
Yeah.
That's really quite interesting. But Elizabeth did have a long time man though, which I think I've heard that before. But she had a long time man
childhood friend or something.
Yeah.
And I was a little surprised because she's known as the Virgin Queen for a reason. Probably because people expected her to be a virgin since she never married. But it makes me wonder if she really was a virgin.
See, that's what I wonder too, because they said that, well, not really, because it said that he was her love, and she got jealous every time he got married. But just because she was in love with him doesn't mean he felt the same way. Or maybe
that she could be with him because
exactly
of status and stuff.
Because the fact that she also because she trusted no one. She trusted no one, which means even though he was a childhood friend who she did love very much, um, I wonder how much she even trusted him because everybody around her was trying to take over her throne just like they were doing to Mary. And I think that guys altogether, she felt she couldn't trust. And I think that even though she did love him and according to the book, she got jealous every time he got married. And, but I think that for her, it was more of a power move. It was like, I kind of believe that maybe she was still a virgin because I think just like her not getting married and having kids, it was on purpose.
Yeah.
It was to prove to the country that she was not what they wanted her to be and that she was going to live her life her way and she was not going to allow her father's destiny to reign.
And even though people were against Mary, I think that if it wasn't for the Bothwell thing, I think she had a chance to be on the throne.
That was her major downfall.
And
right
because the book even said people speculated whether or not the rape was true, and the person who was reading who wrote the book was like but for a few different reasons I think it was true, and one of them being because why would she have rejected his marriage proposal if she really wanted to marry him?
But then again, it also said
any other choice.
It also said the way she acted after that led the writer to believe that she really was raped because she was acting a certain way afterwards. And if anyone's been in that situation, they know that your whole entire behavior changes. And fear takes over a lot.
And we were talking about how afraid Elizabeth was of being overthrown. I think Mary was afraid of things happening that happened in the Tudors, like the fact that Elizabeth was technically illegitimate. That's why she didn't want to divorce. Well, partly because she's also Catholic, but also that's a good portion of why she didn't want to.
She didn't want her child to be.
That's why she didn't want to divorce Darnley, or when she ended up being pregnant with Bothwell's kids, thanks to the rape, she didn't want them to end up being illegitimate either. So it's easier just to deal with that, but then she ended up agreeing to go with the divorce after she ended up miscarrying.
See, I think that was the whole reason she didn't want to do it in the first place, because she didn't want her child to be illegitimate, which I personally think is just bogus altogether. And which I think is another reason that nobody in England liked Elizabeth, not just that she was Protestant, because technically, thanks to the Catholic Church, she was considered illegitimate. And back then, that was, Opal.
So, and the fact that when Mary was executed, the executioner messed it up.
Oh my
That
God.
was supposed to be a swift death.
First, they hit her in the head, and that pain alone. Then the second time when they hit her, it didn't wasn't a clean shot, so they had to hit her a third time. Then he held up her head. I didn't even know. Did they do that normally? But apparently, he held up her head and then dropped it. It's like what?
Actually, because that was funny because you know how sometimes we talk about how funny our feeds are on like social media, how something will show up when we read something or whatever.
Yeah.
I just finished this book last night, and today something popped up on my feed talking about things about Mary's execution, and one of the things
Oh.
was that the whole head thing. He did say that. He said, what did he say? He's like, bow to the queen or something like that.
Hail to our queen or something like that. Yeah.
And then apparently, the head fell, and it turns out she was wearing a wig.
Yeah.
And so apparently that was true because I read it twice in 2 days.
But yeah, that was interesting. Let me see if there's anything else that I wrote in here.
My favorite chapter was the Mary chapter, just because I thought her life story was so interesting, and there was very little that I knew, or at least didn't know which parts were true that I did know. So I loved reading more about her.
It was because there were some things that I did know um, from not only watching Rain um, but I've also done research because after I saw Six the musical, which by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's awesome. Um, but after I saw that, even though I was always interested in King Henry and his wives, it was one of those things where if I happened to see it, then I'd be like, okay, I'll watch this. I'm not doing anything else. But after I saw Six the Musical, I got so intrigued into his wives because usually, to be totally honest, it was more about why did Henry do this? You know, why did he kill so and so? Why did he whatever? But after watching Six the Musical, you realize his wives were more interesting than he could ever be. And them alone was reason. So I started researching them. And eventually, I would like us to read a book about each wife individually. And because that is some of the most, because it's one thing to read a book about, because we've read books before about King Henry and his six wives, but it doesn't really delve completely into his wives. More like, well, Henry was doing this to this wife and whatever. And so I would eventually like to delve more into his wives and stuff like that. So
Yeah. I know
that would
there's
be
this
interesting eventually.
series that has to do, each book individually has to do with his children.
I know I have it on my Kindle list to start reading, and they might be some of the books that I bring up because I'm a big fan of true crime. I'm a true crime junkie. I admit it. Not only do I watch true crime documentaries, which by the way, I'm now watching a documentary about Mary Jo about a few ago. Just saying. I just found it on Netflix, or not Netflix, Hulu. So I'm not interested. But anyway, so I'm a true crime junkie.
I'm a
And
fantasy junkie.
yeah, she's a fantasy junkie. But the one thing that we both have in common that thanks to Six the Musical and the show Rain, we have now gotten into um, King Henry's wives and Mary Queen of Scots.
I'm into.
And then we are slowly getting into just women empowerment movements altogether.
Yeah.
And the interesting things that women did to survive a patriarchal society. And that's one thing that we can both agree on because like I said, my TV shows as well as my books reign around true crime and hers is all fantasy. But there's a few things that we can agree on, which isn't a whole lot to be totally honest.
And you'll read fantasy sometimes, yeah. And there are a couple other genres I do read sometimes, like mystery and horror. Yeah. But fantasy is my main thing, and true crime is her main thing. Yeah. And I've never used to be big on history, nonfiction, any of that. I never was. And last several years, I got more into like King Henry and Mary Queen of Scots, and I got more interested in what actually happened in history to the women more than anything. And
because it's interesting to see how they had to fight. Because in the society that we live in now, we are still fighting a patriarchal society, even with the liberties that we currently have. But back then, women didn't had a lot less than us, and women weren't even allowed to speak out, and therefore women who did it anyway, who defied all odds to become queen of nations, even with everybody in their power around them were all men doing everything they could to destroy the queen herself.
Hmm.
And yet they still managed to stay powerful. And it's amazing. I would eventually, now I know that you're big into King King Henry and his wives, and Mary Queen of Scots. But the two longest reigning monarchs of England was Queen Victoria and, well, the current queen that just recently passed away. She actually surpassed Queen Victoria by only a couple of years. But Queen Victoria was freaking amazing. I've read a few things about her. She was truly, truly in love with her husband, Prince Albert, and they had like 9 kids. And
Also,
this woman was amazing. And I was wondering if you like
yeah,
to read a little bit about her.
I think it'd be interesting to read her as well as Queen Charlotte. She was the queen in Bridgerton, but some of her story they have on Bridgerton is real.
Oh,
Like the
then I was
fact,
about to ask you if that was real, then.
yeah, because Queen Charlotte and King George who was ill, and Queen Charlotte ended up basically
What
running
country are they?
England.
Oh, okay.
But Queen Charlotte ended up ruling because King George was ill. I'm pretty sure he had like I don't think they called it back then, but at least on the show it looked like what he had was Alzheimer's. But I know he was ill in real life. Whether that was it or not, I do not know. But I'll be more interested in seeing how she dealt with that because at least, like I said, you don't always know what's true on a show and what's true in real life. On the show, she truly loved him, and it broke her heart. Because I was telling you, because it reminded me of the whole thing on Mom with Marjorie when she lost her husband. As much as it hurts her, it also was a relief. That's kind of like on here.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't mind learning more about her reign and how she dealt with her husband and all that. I think that would be interesting, especially since back then women rulers were kind of
Oh, we even had that in our presidency. Which president was it? Was it FDR? It was. I'm pretty sure it was one of the Roosevelts. But anyway, he got sick, and it was actually his
yeah
wife that ran our
yeah.
country. And from what I understand, she was one hell of a ruler, but she had to hide it, and nobody knew her husband was sick. Otherwise, they would, just disregard everything and let the vice run in. But she ran the country for years while he was sick. But yet women in power is ridiculous. It's just, yeah. So, next month is your choice on
Hmm.
book. So what book are we going to read next month?
Crooked Kingdom.
Which our first book of our book club of January of this year was actually Six of Crows. But because, even though I liked the book, I did. Watch the last video if you want to know. But, I'm more, like I said, into either true crime or true history. Let me put it this thing. I'm into true stuff. And so that's why I went with a different book. But she does want me to read the second installment of the Six of Crows duology.
Hmm.
So that's where we're going with this.
Because I've been enjoying my reread. I haven't read it in a while, and I have new copies since Christmas, so I'm excited to read it again. And I'm excited
And
for her to see certain things. Okay, I want to see her reaction. Like we were reading some of Six of Crows together, and it was funny because at one point she just started screaming. I was like, "Okay, what part are you at?" So there's some certain scenes that I really want to see her reaction on.
I'm a visual person. So when I read, I can literally envision what I'm reading. I
Me
can
too.
literally see like my mind is playing it out. And it's really quite interesting because when I'm reading the book and then I can envision something, like Kate being stabbed, then
She's still
it
not
upsets me
over.
more.
She's still not over me. My character death in my very first series,
Even though she wasn't even on there that long, it was the way she died and the way she worded it that just destroyed me. Just saying.
and she won't let me forget it. So,
No, no, no.
well, we had a fun time talking about this book. It
Yes.
was actually very interesting. It had a kind of a boring start just because
Yeah.
it wasn't what I expected, but I got really into it. I got into learning more about Elizabeth because we talk a lot about the queens, but
They don't
the
mention the
wives.
kids very often.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was nice learning more about Elizabeth, but especially Mary Queen of Scots was really nice to learn more about
Yeah.
because I've been
And it
meaning
would
to
be interesting to
anyways.
read more about just her. just her.
Just Mary
That
Queen
would
of
be
Scots, or even just Elizabeth, or Charlotte, or Victoria, one of the other queens that reigned.
well. Like I said, after in April would be my turn, so I'll think about if I want to go that route or not. I have a month to think about it.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
see you next month.
See ya. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you read this book, if you want to read this book, and we'll chat below in the comments. Until next time.
And my daughter is an author, so please check out her books because they are great. And like I said, I'm not big on fantasy, but they're great.
Thank you.